question I get asked is like, what is the best path to actually get a healthy home for my family to live in?
In regards to some of the most common questions I get about like home building materials, give me like your 30-second rundown on most toxic option and least toxic option. So flooring.
In a world obsessed with convenience and quick fixes, I'm approaching wellness differently. After healing from chronic illness by overhauling my entire life, I'm now on a mission to help women like me to thrive and not just survive. I'm Kristen, and you're listening to the Organamama Podcast. Hey new parents, if you're looking for an all-in-one resource to create a toxin-free baby registry, you need to grab a copy of my viral guide, Organababy, which has been downloaded by thousands of parents since I launched it in December 2023. Organababy covers what materials and ingredients to avoid in baby items, what materials and ingredients to look for, safe and recommended baby brands, and everything I personally have on hand for my own babies. Organababy is organized into the same exact categories as Babylist, so creating a toxin-free baby registry has literally never been easier. Organamama podcast listeners can get 20% off Organababy with code PODCAST, and the link for Organababy is down in today's show notes.
Welcome back to the Organamama Podcast. Today we're going to be talking all about home buying, whether that's a new home or you're building a house. I am here with Christine Cimabue. She is a passionate leader in the construction industry dedicated to advocating for healthier homes. Her journey began in 2011 when she purchased her first home, excited to embark on a full renovation. However, her plans were derailed by the discovery of serious mold issues during the demolition phase, prompting a profound shift in her focus. Faced with the reality of her home's condition, Christine made the difficult decision to sell her dream home. This experience ignited her commitment to ensuring that other families wouldn't have to endure similar challenges. As a woman in a predominantly male industry, she recognized the importance of being a voice for safe, healthy living environments. Christine channeled her passion into founding Holistic Homes, a company dedicated to promoting wellness through construction and design. Christine, welcome to the Organamama Podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction.
Yes. Well, I'm so excited to pick your brain on all things home and home construction. As I just shared with you before we started recording, and as most of the listeners know, this topic of buying a home and making sure to look for something that is really safe for your family is so near and dear to my heart after we have a very long and complicated history with mold in our family. And we actually just recently went through the home buying process earlier in 2025. So I shared a little bit with some of my followers on Instagram about what things we were looking for when it came to buying a home and how we ended up seeing a lot of new construction homes that had a lot of mold in them, which I think surprises people initially to hear that, because you would assume, oh, the older the home, probably the more likely it is to have water damage, which we obviously know is not necessarily the case. So all that being said, I would love, at least for starters, for you to go ahead and share with the listeners today a little bit more about what happened with you with your first home that you had to sell it.
Okay, this is going to be a good topic because home buying, home renovating, home building, they're really all completely different categories. And back in 2011 is when I was purchasing my very first home. It was a tiny little condo, and it needed a whole lot of TLC, but I've been in the construction industry well before that. So I knew, let's buy a fixer, let's gut it, let's fix it up. What I didn't anticipate was the entire kitchen being covered in mold, and it was not visible. So that's often a misconception, is that if I have mold in my home, I will see it, or there will be water pouring down on me from the second level, or that it's going to be a result of a flood. Mold is not always the result of a big water damage event. Sometimes it can be a slow, undetected leak. Well, in the case of the home that I purchased, I had an inspection, I had the realtor, I had all of the typical processes, but once we had demolished the kitchen, took the cabinetry down, took the tile down, there was mold floor to ceiling on all three walls of this kitchen. and all work had to stop. And it was like so surprising. And where did this all come from? And how was anyone actually living in this home? Well, it turns out that there was an old cast iron drain pipe, which is what was used in older homes. This was like a 1960s home. There was an old cast iron pipe that had a crack in it. It's just old, and anytime the second level bathroom was used, the shower, it just poured water behind the walls in the kitchen, and it was terrible. Not something that you want to encounter when you're like have a mortgage and you're going to renovate something and it kind of blows your budget having to deal with mold. But that experience, also having eyes on the construction industry, led me to realize that there is a lot of dark, dirty secrets in the home building industry, and nobody's really prioritizing occupant or homeowner health at all.
Yeah. Okay. So I would say, in terms of our listeners right now, there's going to be three categories of people that are thinking about their future with a home. We have people who are renting. We have people who currently own a home and, will probably own a different home at some point in the future. And then we have people who are wanting to build or in the process of building a home. So I'd like to briefly just kind of address from your perspective each of these three different categories of listeners to make sure that we're hitting on what some of their biggest questions might be. I think one of the biggest questions I get from renters is, first of all, what kinds of things in a rental contract should they be looking for that are going to help protect them from, let's say they find mold and then they're stuck in their contract and can't get out, / when somebody is searching for an apartment or a house to rent, what are some red flags that you would immediately say, hey, walk away from this rental situation if you see this?
Of those three categories, and I know that there can be some others in between those, but of those three categories, renters have it the hardest. It will be the biggest challenge for a renter to find a healthy home. That is really, really upsetting and should not be that way. But the reality is, and I'm in California, so I am in a very tenant friendly state. So that could be a good start. If someone is considering maybe moving to another state, look at the landlord and tenant relationships in that state. There are certain states that favor the landlord or the property owner more than the tenant. So here in California, the tenant has a whole lot of rights, but I have seen tenant contracts, lease agreements that specifically state the tenant has zero authority to do any sort of third-party testing on the property, which that may not be good, because that restricts you as the tenant from being able to do any sort of mold testing or investigated testing. So reading the lease agreement is really important. And even as the tenant, you should have rights to amend the contract or make changes. It's so common to just get the contract, sign it, ready to move in, but really read what you are getting into, not just the payment terms, but what are your rights in that lease agreement. So that's a piece to it, of course, knowing what you're getting into before signing. But also find out if that landlord or that property owner, are they local? Are they out of state and they just have a property management company overseeing things? Sometimes that can be really challenging if the property owner is out of state. There's really no property management going on. And just by nature of that owner being out of state, they don't have eyes on the property and doing the necessary repairs. So what is the maintenance schedule of that property? it's it's going to be a challenge because it's multi-layered in that you really don't know the history of the property. You don't know if the prior tenants, overflowed the bathtub and really thought nothing of it. They just cleaned it up and never reported it. No repairs or drying out of the building materials. We just don't have data and history on rental properties. So it is unfortunately a huge challenge to get them right and find a property owner who is again going to like prioritize the health and maintenance of their property and not just have dollar signs in their eyeballs.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so tough. I mean, I think this is one of the most heartbreaking common stories I get in my direct messages on Instagram is people who are saying, "Hey, we're renting. Our 3-year-old son is super sick. We think we found mold under the kitchen sink and around the shower, but our landlord is just telling us to bleach it and that there's nothing else they can do." And it just breaks my heart because people feel so powerless, and it's like this shouldn't be the case. Just from like a human rights standpoint, people should be able to get out of something if their home is making them sick.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And if we just took the health aspect out of it, as a property owner, you should want to have longevity out of your investment. So if your investment, just from a dollar standpoint, is deteriorating or water intrusion is happening around the windows or there's mold rotting the subfloor, like these are investment issues as well. So know what you're getting into with the landlord and with the rights that you have within your lease agreement. And, something I see very common, even though I am on the building side, I still get comments and questions all the time about the ERMI testing, which I know is talked a lot about in the mold community, but that's going to be a challenge. Like there's no clear path in mold testing a rental to get the green light to be able to move in. So you really have to do good kind of thorough inspections, just visually, moisture testing. In short, rentals, you just have to do the very best that you can and have protection that if it's not a property that you can heal and thrive in, that you have an exit plan that's not going to hurt you financially.
Yeah. So let's say somebody is going to check out a rental property, just to check it out before they've signed anything. This isn't always the case, but let's say someone's actually able to get access to go look inside, which I know a lot of times this can't even happen because you don't even know what unit they're going to have available because you're signing an agreement 6 months in advance. But let's say someone is able to go in and look. What things should they be looking for in that, 15-minute tour of a rental property?
Okay, this is going to be kind of wildly different depending on the property. But if we're talking about like multifamily, where there's like, 100 units or fourplex, as a general rule of thumb, and I use this when I vacation as well, I never stay on the top level. A lot of these high density or even hotel structures have flat roofs. Flat roofs are notorious for leaks and they have equipment up there and there's a whole lot of penetrations. So I just avoid the top level. So if I could make a blanket statement, it would be that avoid the top level. And in a rental, bring a moisture meter, bring a thermal camera if you can. Thermal camera is not going to detect water damage, but it can be like a good starting point. And use your body. Like spend as much time as you possibly can within that unit. Like even if you can be in there for an hour. I have had people reach out and say that they've been in a home for an hour and it made them sick. So that could be telling as well. So I really just want people in the rental space to understand that doing the best you can is really all that you can do. So that's what I would do in a rental situation. And also get information, be really honest and open. And if you have a history of mold illness or chemical sensitivity, share that. Share that with the person showing you the property and get their feedback. They may say, "Oh, this might not be the right property for you then." So, as much as you're willing to be open and share, I would just be really honest and transparent. And then the last little piece, important one in a rental scenario, is document everything, everything, everything. It's very common to get a sheet, kind of 1 or 2 pages, that's having you do a like new move-in inspection. Is the light switch plate cracked, or like any damage that you see? Use that very thoroughly. Do a move-in inspection. Note what you see, and along the way, if there is water damage, or if you do see condensation developing on the grills that are supplying the air, like anything that you see, take a picture and document it, because this is going to be in your benefit if things do happen to go south in a rental.
Yeah, and circling back to what you said about like being transparent when you're touring a property or speaking with a property manager, I sometimes get people saying like, "Well, I don't want to, make them disinterested in me as a renter by oversharing." And I would say that if you have a property manager or a landlord who suddenly becomes like offish to you, if you start telling them, "Oh, I have a history of mold sickness," that's probably a really good sign that they do not want you to be renting from them, because they know that their property is going to make you sick. So
that is very true. And it's going to feel a little defeating, because that will likely occur quite a bit. If you are open and transparent that you need a home free of mold, and you share that with the landlord and they turn you away, that could be a red flag, just like you said. It is. I work with property managers. I have clients that are developers, and they are coming to me because, one, they want to have healthy homes in their portfolio, and they also see the benefit to having a property that is not going to basically deteriorate in 15 or 20 years and need to be completely gutted. So it's out there. It's still not prevalent, but being honest and documenting the entire experience can go a long way.
yeah, that's so good. Well, hopefully for those of you who are renters, this was helpful information. We are going to move on now to homes for buying or building. So, Christine, if somebody is wanting to buy a home, whether they're a first-time homeowner or a hopeful first-time homeowner, or they're moving from one home to the next, I would say probably a lot of the things that you just said are also applicable in this scenario as well when you're inspecting a home. But you have more control, obviously, over what's happening when you're going to be buying a home. So when somebody is house hunting, what are some of the initial red flags they should be looking for? Not even necessarily before they get eyes on the actual property, but even from an online listing. What are some things that people should be keeping an eye out for that would immediately make them possibly wary of either potential mold or hazardous building materials in a home, whether that's looking at the online listing or when they go for an actual walkthrough of the property?
Well, really, existing homes are not all that different from a rental property. Question I get asked is like, what do I need to do to have a healthy home? Like, if it's just like all the options are on the table, what is the best path to actually get a healthy home for my family to live in? Without a doubt, the best path to go down, if all of the options are available, is to do a ground up custom new build. That is the way that you have full control. We implement third-party verification. We do everything and set the expectation for the homeowner. That is the best way. From there, if that is not an option, because that's, going to be the most costly of the options, purchasing an existing home, you need to know what you're getting into. So if purchasing an existing home is the only option, then from there, I often get asked, should I buy an existing home that's been upgraded, or should I buy an existing home that's old, original, and, gut it and have it completely renovated under my watch? From those two options, my preference would be the property that needs a renovation, because purchasing a flipped property, you have to know that that property was purchased with the intention of dollars and profit at the forefront. That is just the reality of flipped properties. It's purchased by an investor, and the goal is to turn it around quickly, renovate it, and get it back on the market. So you don't know what is behind the walls. You do not know. In some cases, permits may not have been pulled. There may have not been any oversight. There may be moldy lumber in that home. You just don't know. So if I had the choice, and that's what we did here in Southern California for several years, was take existing properties and completely strip them down. And you see a lot behind the walls. So if you're looking at a newer home or one that's 20, 30, 40 years old, I would go with the old home with the budget and the scope to actually gut the entire thing, like inside and out. That's really how you're going to, get a custom new build is at the top. A step down from there would be an existing home that you can gut inside and out. But buying an existing property and going into it with the idea, we're just going to start with the kitchen, just know that it's very, very common for that to balloon. And you start with the kitchen, and then you realize, all of the plumbing in here is old and needs redone. Oh, all of the electrical is old wire and it's a fire hazard now. We have to rewire the entire home. It is very common for a renovation to balloon out of control. So that's why I have the preference of gutting the entire thing if you can.
So what about somebody who's in the, $300,000 or less home price range? Probably they're not coming in with a massive $100,000 budget to renovate their whole house. Maybe they have an extra $10,000. They can do a few things like change out maybe rip up some carpet or something like that. What kind of recommendations would you make for people in that scenario, especially if they have children, they're looking to buy a home for their family? What things should they be looking for that you would say this is an immediate no for when you're looking at homes?
Okay, immediate no on existing homes. There's a long list. But to start, if your home has a basement and you are purchasing an existing home that has a basement, gut it. Unfinished basement, gut the entire thing. Statistics even show that like 97% of basements at some point in time will have water intrusion because they're built typically to like standard building code requirements. Most basements already built are going to have some form of leaks. And if you have insulation and drywall and carpet down there or LVP, you don't know what's going on behind there, but there's likely that there's some leak. So if I was purchasing a home and it had a basement today, I would gut the basement and just leave it unfinished. And leave it unfinished for at least a year. See what happens throughout the rainy season and really see what's going on. So that's what I would do for a basement. If you really start with the exterior, I mean, there's a ton of things to look for in an existing home. It's not likely you're going to catch everything, but start with the exterior, because I often tell my clients doing new builds that, want to talk about the paint and the flooring. I say, we're going to get there, but the non-toxic low VOC paint is not going to make a darn of a difference if your roof is leaking, if your windows are leaking. So start with those big and costly items. So purchasing an existing home, find out if the windows or the roof is leaking, because if so, that's going to be really costly to fix and going to probably already have water damage.
Yeah. So back in 2022, after we lost our first home to mold, we were house hunting. Our budget was like under 300,000. We had a very, very, very hard time even finding anything that met our criteria just based on the listing photos online. And one of the things, you can tell me what your thoughts are on this, Christine, but one of the things that we said absolute no to, and this was specifically based on the previous house we were in, so we were kind of biased, but we were not going to look at any home that had a crawl space, because it was our crawl space in our previous home that had a leak in it. It had been improperly insulated, or not even, there was no vapor barrier in there. There was a leak next to the intake for the HVAC. The home was built in the 1980s, and then the mold was going through our HVAC throughout the entire home.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, lovely. Really lovely, right? And we had a 6-month-old baby who was super sick. So anyways, as we were house hunting for our next home after that, we just said absolutely no to crawl spaces because we were aware at that point of just, like you said, the majority of basements will have some water event at some point. From my understanding, it's even worse with crawl spaces, especially since they're not often built well, since their majority of them were from previous decades. Give me your thoughts on that if you have any.
Crawl spaces would also be on that list. And this really all comes down to standard building code construction is the very bare minimum standard to build a home. Unfortunately, a majority of the builders in the US take that as the gold standard. That is not correct. So if you build a basement to building code standards and the city inspector comes by and says, yep, all good, keep going, that basement is going to end up with water intrusion at some point in its life because it has one layer of damp proofing. That's it. That's not sufficient for a long-term dry basement, but it passes code. Same thing with a crawl space. A crawl space, there is no air barrier between the crawl space air volume and the interior air volume. So it's a term referred to as stacking effect. So whatever the air quality is in the crawl space, the ventilated crawl space, is rising up into the home. So if there's mold in that crawl space growing on the framing underneath, it's going to end up in your home as well. There is a healthy and watertight way to build a basement. There is a healthy way to build a crawl space because your foundation is not just it's just not whatever you want. It is going to be driven by the soil's engineer. So certain pieces of land, certain areas cannot have a slab foundation, like concrete slab. There are areas that need a basement because of space. There are areas that you can really only build with a crawl space foundation because of the property. So there is a healthy way to build any foundation type, but yes, crawl spaces are notorious for issues as well. Slab foundations, they are great, but they can be done in a way that is not healthy. It's very common for certain parts of the US to not use what's called a vapor retarder or vapor barrier before the concrete is poured. So that would be like a membrane that is laid down on the soil, and then there's rebar, and then the concrete is poured. Some jurisdictions do not require a vapor barrier. And that means if there's a heavy rain, if there's a high water table, if that soil gets wet, that moisture is going to come up inside and going to potentially lead to mold on the backside of your flooring. So yes, in the topic of purchasing an existing home, red flags to look for would be a finished basement. Yes, also a crawl space. really prioritizing the exterior. I really hate to see raised planters that are shared with an exterior wall. It just drives me bananas because the job of that planter is to hold wet soil and get irrigated and grow these beautiful flowers, and it's just every day getting wet. Well, if it's sharing a wall with your home, and I have seen them share a wall with a bedroom, like a headboard backed up to a raised planter, there was water damage in that wall. It's not uncommon because, again, the code requirement for waterproofing of that planter wall is bare minimum, and it just takes the smallest hole to allow water to come inside.
Yeah. And also, I think another good point on that topic of just like outdoor, like lawns, like landscaping, is just people planting things too close to their house in general in garden beds.
Yeah. Or grass. We see a lot of grass up against, like coming all the way up against the home. It's beautiful. I get it. But you also need to know that in order to have grass, you also need to have sprinkler heads, like irrigation that sprays. And that is essentially like watering the side of your home. So, a good rule of thumb, and even if you're purchasing an existing home that does have planting around the home, remove it. You can remove it, cap the irrigation. It's going to be a little bit of work involved, but I like to at least have 2 feet from the exterior wall to planting. So, it can be a gravel bed, it can be pavers, it could be concrete, just getting any additional moisture away from your foundation.
Okay, I'm interrupting the conversation for just a sec because I'm curious. Have you ever wondered what the best way to test your home for mold is? What about all the symptoms that are associated with toxic mold exposure? Or maybe you'd love to have info at your fingertips about how to go about house hunting when you want to avoid mold. I recently launched the Organomama's Guide to Mold, which is a mini video course that answers all of these things and way more. It's basically my version of Mold for Dummies, and it will save you quite literally thousands of hours of research when it comes to the topic of toxic mold. Check out today's show notes for a link to get started on protecting your family from toxic mold exposure today.
And then in terms of roof, what are the things that people should be looking for in terms of the roofing and the gutters when they're house hunting?
Oh, roofs are tough. Even new roofs. So I would really have some, observation and testing done on the roof. If there's a chimney present, have a chimney sweep inspection. That is the main job of a chimney sweep, is to inspect the chimney, the stack, make sure there's no water intrusion around the flashing. But chimneys are notorious for leaks. After all, we're like creating this watertight structure. And then what we go and do is punch a bunch of holes in it for windows and punch a bunch of holes in it for vent stacks or skylights or chimneys. So just know that any of those, what they're referred to as penetrations, those are weak and vulnerable areas of your home. All of them. So I would inspect, thermal camera. I would do some leak testing. I would really do a thorough inspection as much as you can during your due diligence stage of buying a home. Know exactly what you are inheriting. You are taking on someone else's home.
So when somebody is going to look at a home that they're interested in buying, what items would you say are absolutely imperative for them to have on their person when they're entering a property or looking at the exterior to check for safety of the home?
Well, I really wouldn't put much on the homeowner. The homeowner should not, or soon to be homeowner, should not feel like the inspections are their responsibility. The due diligence period of buying a home, ideally it's longer versus shorter, but that's when you can bring in a mold inspector. That's when you can bring in somebody who's going to get up on the roof and get in the attic and bring a thermal camera. So having an inspector that has those tools. So I would bring everyone in for an inspection, a sewer line inspection. That is very important when purchasing an existing home. And then you can collect all of this data, get mold testing done, and then that's when you and the realtors are going to start talking, because things are going to be discovered, either catastrophic or minor, and then have the discussion around, if this is the right home for you. The goal should be collect as much data as possible, but I would at a minimum do a sewer line inspection, a roof inspection, mold inspection, having a home inspector who uses a thermal camera. You just want to feel really informed when you're making that very, very big purchase.
Yes. And when our family went through the process of buying an existing home back in, I guess this was early 2023, we worked with our realtor to write several clauses into our offer that would allow us to back out if certain things were found during the inspection period, if certain types of mold testing results came back and things like that, because we knew that was super important to us. So that's another thing to consider when you're going through this buying process, is make sure you're working with a realtor who understands the legal side, or at least can pull in someone who can work on the legal side of writing up an offer that is working in your favor to protect you in case you come across something that you're like, hey, this is bigger than I actually want to deal with. I wouldn't have the budget to do any kind of big remediation, or I wouldn't want to get stuck buying a home that has X, Y, or Z. So you have to kind of think ahead of what are the things I would be okay with fixing and what are the things that I would not be okay with fixing, and make sure you've already thought that through when you're putting in an offer on a home.
Yeah. Yeah. Because again, there are requirements for disclosures. So when you purchase a home, the previous owner is required to list out all of the disclosures and basically everything that they know about the home that happened or isn't working. And unfortunately, those disclosures do not always point to potential mold instances. So again, there could be something that was minor that previous owner doesn't think is necessary to disclose. So you just want to feel really informed if you're going to be what I call inheriting someone else's problem.
Yeah. And whenever you go to look at a property for the first time, when you're just in the, before you've made an offer, Christine already mentioned having a moisture meter. Those are not expensive. Thermal camera is going to be a little more expensive than that. But you can definitely at least have a moisture meter where you can take it throughout the interior and exterior of the home and kind of see what the water percentages are at on hard surfaces, which is really helpful. We used it a lot around bathrooms and under kitchen sinks to see hey, is any of this wet? And there was actually a home we looked at where there was a lot of small tile in the master bathroom shower, and we took our moisture meter and kind of swept it all over that area, and we saw some really high numbers, and we ended up not even putting an offer on that house because we were pretty convinced that there was probably some serious water issues in that master shower, which is a pretty common thing you see. But yeah, and then also just flashlights so that you can look underneath cabinets, when you're going inside the home, looking under cabinets, looking underneath anywhere that water runs around, a water heater or washer and dryer. Look for signs of any water staining or swelling of wood or anything like that can really help clue you in to if there's been a water damage event in the past that might be impacting air quality or causing a mold issue in the home. So we're going to move to new construction. This is your area of expertise. This is what you do the most. So I'm excited to dive in here. I just want to start by saying that one of the parts of new home construction that I feel like people in the holistic community tend to be the most aware of, or are becoming more aware of, is the possibility of moldy lumber. Now, obviously, I know that there is so much more to holistic home building than just making sure that your lumber is good. But let's start with this topic, because this is the thing that people have the most questions about. Of, if I'm building a home, how do I make sure that I'm not having moldy lumber being a part of my framing and being enclosed inside drywall once walls are going up.
This is really the sweet spot, like having the opportunity to build a home. And I'm talking about a custom build, not a production build. If you just spend a little bit of time on social media, you will quickly find yourself down a rabbit hole of claim and defect and issues and just horror stories of a lot of big name production builders. So those are completely different animals. Again, a production build, typically it's like ground up in like 4 to 6 months. That is lightning speed. And just know that that home is not yours. As much as they make you feel like it's your home, you get to pick out the tile and the hardware and the paint, that is not your home. You cannot make construction decisions about a production home. It is the builder's home until it closes escrow. So you have to make an appointment to go to that project, and it's just going to be a standard building code built home. So having a production home is typically not going to result in truly a healthy home. So
before you get on to custom builds, let's say someone is doing a production build.
Yes.
And they go to visit their home site during the framing stage. Let's say they notice that there is water damage on the lumber, whether that's from like where it was sitting before it got erected or it got rained on and not dried out properly. What should somebody do in that situation?
Before you even get in that situation, read the contract. There are a lot of terms in most of those production builder contracts that protect the builder and not you. And oftentimes will result in you losing your deposit if you walk away from a property. So read it very thoroughly. There are mold clauses in there. And oftentimes I have found that you as a soon-to-be homeowner do not even have the right to do third-party testing on that property. So start with reading the contract. And again, this goes back to full transparency. Talk to the sales center about, hey, I am coming from a current home that has mold and it's making my family sick. I'm wanting to buy a new build home that is not going to make me sick. Mold is a very big deal to me. How do you, as the builder, address mold? You can get a response of, we're the best and there's never any mold, or you could, feel gaslit with that question. Be open and transparent and read your contract if you're going to do a production build.
Yeah, and I'll just add a little note here of the home that we're currently living in was we had a 2-month turnaround of when we had to move states. So wow. We ended up buying a new construction spec home, but what was really great about it is it was a local builder that only does a small number of homes per year. And so we actually got to meet with the builder himself before we had even put in an offer. And we asked him so many questions. And he took us through like 4 different homes in our neighborhood that were all at different stages. So we could see like how their team was doing things at different parts of the process, like at groundbreaking, at like basement laying, at lumber, at drywall going up, at like framing, and then drywall going up. And that was super helpful because we could see that they were not cutting any corners. And when we asked him about mold and about how they're treating the lumber, like he had an answer for everything. And he was so like accommodating to us and was talking us through like all of his thoughts on like construction materials and how they like keep things safe. And like that was huge. But I don't think we would have had that experience if we had chosen like a national builder, because they just don't have a kind of time or capacity or interest to talk to potential home buyers about like a spec home like that.
Yeah. And that is huge. And it's very sad when I hear homeowners, working with a spec builder or any builder at all, and they feel like afraid to bring up these topics. I hear it so often. I'm afraid, I don't want the builder to leave, I really like this builder, or, I'm afraid I'm going to scare them off. This, we are easily talking about, kind of common across the US to see new builds cost upwards of $1 million plus. This is a huge, huge investment. Do not leave it in the hands of a builder. That builder is going to build your home and leave. You and your family are the ones going to stay and should be thriving and not sick. So speak up, and don't be afraid to ask questions. That is quite literally what you are paying that builder to do. The builder's job is to build you your home, not build the builder's home or what they've always done. So stand up and really speak up for what you need. You do not need to know how to build a home or feel like you need to be a contractor in order to actually get a healthy home built.
Okay, so custom builds. We're circling back to the question about lumber and the quality of the lumber and making sure that they're dry and not moldy.
So the answer might surprise you. If you had to guess how you would address that, what would you say is the best way to address moldy lumber?
With a builder?
Yeah. If you were in that situation and you were having your home built, when would you do that, and what would you say?
When, as in like what time of year, or like when would you bring it up?
During the project, when would you bring it up?
Oh, I would bring it up before it was even started.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. That is what you want to be doing. You want to bring up that very important topic before any construction ever begins and before any contracts are actually signed. So if the topic of moldy lumber is a high priority to you, which in your case it was important, that is something that needs to be in writing and expectations are set. Like, what is it that you mean when you say, I want my home built with no moldy lumber? That's going to mean something different to you, something different to the builder, and absolutely something different to the framer who's going to show up with 15 guys and start framing the house. So how do you get that important expectation documented? There are numerous times that I get like SOS phone calls of, help. I haven't worked on the project, but they're coming to me because their home is being framed and it's full of moldy lumber. And unfortunately, my response is it's a bit too late at that point. At that point, you're looking at remediation if your home is going up with moldy lumber. So our process, when we're working one-on-one with a client and their entire team, that is an early conversation well before even contractor selection. So we go through like a full contractor interview list and bring up the question, just like you did, of how do you deal with moldy lumber? Like, this should be a question of what do you do? And hear what the builder's response is. I've heard responses of, it's harmless, it's lumberyard mold, or that's impossible, every home has mold, or, we can't avoid it, we live in Texas and all of the lumber here is moldy. Or you'll get a response of, we'll do whatever you want. So that question alone can be really telling, because that's kind of setting the stage for like, are you and this builder on the same page? He thinks moldy lumber is like no big deal and he's kind of laughing. But to you, it's super important. Well, this whole situation of not being on the same page is going to absolutely escalate during the entire build. So the best time to bring up the topic of moldy lumber and other important topics is before things are finalized and signed and agreed, and really setting up the stage for how important this is and how it's going to be handled.
Yes. Okay. That's so helpful. So for people who are wanting to do a custom build home, they're obviously recognizing right now that they definitely should be talking about lumber with their potential builder before anything is signed. What other things should homeowners be asking about or questioning when they're trying to choose their team?
That's the most important part, is building your team. If you are going to undergo the time and the expense to do a custom new build, you need to dang make sure it's done right. I don't know anyone who wants to go through that process only to then find out that the chimney is leaking or, any other issues. So it is going to take more than just an architect and just a builder to get a healthy home. That is matter of fact. And not because the architect and the builder, don't know what they're doing, not it at all. It is that you need to make sure that what your expectations are come move-in day are communicated and sprinkled throughout all of your project documents, reflected on your plans, reflected in the material selections, and that is just not standard. That is standard. That is not standard for a healthy custom new build. So, understanding that you're going to have other team members. Of course, you'll have a structural engineer. We have a high performance mechanical designer that we bring into all of our projects, because that is a very important piece to building a healthy home, is all of the indoor air quality. We also make sure that the plans and the material selections reflect expectations, because the truth is your plans and anything that you're signing, your bid, that is your contract. So if your plans have a floor plan and an elevation and a lighting plan, that's what you're going to get. And everything else needed to build your home is going to be what the builder does on all of their other projects. But those plans are approved. Like, the plans that are required to pull a permit are not typically sufficient to reflect expectations.
So, can you share with us a little bit about what are some of the common building materials that are used that you would say stay away from that? Choose something better.
Oh, there's a lot.
Spray foam insulation, right?
I have very strong opinions on the use of spray foam insulation in older homes and in new homes. And this all can feel really overwhelming really quick, because this is like a million different parts moving and building a home. And how do you make sure what the builder is doing is going to result in a healthy home? So I look at things like insulation and spray foam as what are the pros and cons. And one of the big downsides to using spray foam is that everyone can agree it is permanent. Whether you're on the left side or the right side of the aisle in spray foam, it is permanent. It does not come out unless you remediate it out. But that could be a downside enough just right there. If you need to do an addition or repairs or anything, you're going to have to remediate it out. The other part is that there is really no one that can say it is free of any potential defects or toxins or issues. It requires a perfect install for it to perform as intended. And that's just really hard to achieve when you're dealing with humans. So, weigh the pros and cons. I get told every single day from builders all over the US, spray foam is great. I have gone through a 6-month process on one project where the builder and the spray foam installer are telling me that it is inert, there is no VOCs, there's no off-gassing after it's installed. And me, as the client advocate, the client says, I want 0 VOCs in my home. And so the solution here is, if in fact this is a 0 VOC product, we are going to send it to a lab for testing. That is where for this particular project we ended up. I need documentation that what you are telling me is actually true. And that is my take on really the entire process of building a healthy home. Is first starting with, yes, how are we going to achieve a healthy home? Next, everyone is guilty until proven innocent. That is just how new builds are successful. Just because it is a newly installed window does not mean that it is not leaking. The only way for you to prove to me that that window is not leaking is for it to be leak tested. That is not a building code requirement. So you can install a new window and keep on going. But nobody is required to actually put water on that window. And same thing with spray foam. Spray foam, their documentation says that it is, free of VOCs after the off-gassing, and it does not have potential toxin issues within the home. Well, we're going to have it tested and we're going to have that verified. Everything needs to be verified. So that is our bread and butter process, is dialing in the details, making sure it's reflected and documented on the plans so it's clear as day what the client expectation is. And then during the actual build, everything needs to be third-party verified. And it does absolutely add to the cost of the build, but it is worth it. It is a home inspection during a new build is a couple $100. Leak testing of windows for a new build can usually be a couple $1,000, depending on how many windows. But typically, like less than $10,000, you could probably get most of the windows leak tested. And then if you're wanting to have like verification of spray foam, that's a couple $100 if someone's like coming to the site. So yes, this is absolutely going to add cost, but I, as a contractor myself and as a building consultant, I think it is just quite silly to be building a home, just leaving it in the hands of the builder and that city inspector who comes by for 30 minutes.
That is so helpful. I feel like you're probably just blowing people's minds right now. In regards to some of the most common questions I get about like home building materials, give me like your 30-second rundown on the most toxic option and least toxic option. So flooring. Most toxic option people could choose, least toxic option they could choose. I know that there's nuance to this, but give me your like quick rundown on this.
So the most toxic type of flooring would be like a general off the shelf like LVP, which is a luxury vinyl plank. It's just plastic. It can have VOCs. It's also a vapor barrier. So if there are moisture issues in the slab, it's not going to get resolved and it's going to get trapped behind that LVP. For our clients that are severely chemically sensitive, mold sensitive, just like never want to deal with mold again in their lives, we do a polished concrete floor. So there is zero flooring and it is just a concrete floor.
Okay. And then what about carpet?
No and no. We really rarely ever do any kind of carpet because there are lower toxin carpets and wool and hand-dyed wool carpet. Yes, but they harbor dust. They can hold on to mycotoxins. They're very hard to keep clean. If you do a wool carpet, it is really challenging to actually clean. So we typically just do no carpet and say, how do you like a big area rug?
Yes, area rugs that you can clean yourself, pick up, make sure they're getting aired out, vacuum regularly. Yeah. Some of them can be machine washed, which is really nice. Yeah. Okay, what about paint?
Paint. This is something people do not think about paint. Paint is not an afterthought. It is not, oh, we're almost done with the project. Let's talk about paint. No, that is big red flag, because paint is actually a part of what's referred to as your building assembly. So like your exterior walls and the framing and the insulation, and you have drywall. Not all paints are the same, just like not all insulation. So a Benjamin Moore type of paint, that is like a latex acrylic based paint. There's other paints that are mineral based paints. Those two types of paints perform differently. So they have something called a PERM rating, that is the rating in how vapor can move through it. So a lacquer paint, or like a high gloss type of paint, has a very, very low PERM rating, meaning that vapor cannot pass through it. So it could trap moisture behind it. Same with a latex based paint. It still has a pretty low PERM rating. So it's moderately vapor open. To give you a number, it's typically somewhere between like 2 to 8. But then a mineral based paint, it's completely vapor open. It has no latex in it or acrylic. So paint should not be a conversation at the end of the project. That should be a conversation during the actual planning. But if I had to say, in the like paint and wall finish realm, we'd say no way, Jose, to vinyl wallpaper. Vinyl wallpaper is a vapor barrier. And if you have vinyl wallpaper on an exterior wall, meaning like a wall that is shared with an outside wall, and there is water that gets in that wall, it's not going to be able to dry. So just, take into consideration the walls in the planning process.
So good. Okay, Christine, you have dumped literally so much knowledge on us in the last hour. Is there anything else that you would add for people who are wanting to build a home, any other pieces of advice that you would like to share? And then also tell us how people can actually utilize you in their home building process.
I really just want everyone to be able to thrive in their home. Like if you're in a rental and you are doing great, like there should be no rush to like want to buy a home or build a home. Like if you're happy, healing, thriving, all of that, great. If you are in a home that's making you sick, got to find another solution. The best path to having a healthy home, from my perspective as a contractor, is being able to do a custom new build. That is what we do all day, every day, is consult on new build projects all over the US. So you can reach out to us if you are planning a extensive renovation or doing a custom new build project. And then you can find us on Instagram, Holistic Homes by Christine. We have a podcast where we give a bunch of free information and a ton of free content on Instagram. So that's where you can reach us there and just send us a DM.
And you have a course as well that people can buy, correct?
We do. So if someone, wants to take the reins of their project themselves, then we have a course, the Holistic Homes Blueprint course, that you can go through module by module, get some information, and start having some hard conversations with your architect and builder.
Yeah, that is incredible. I'm so glad that people like you exist to help people who are dealing with, chemical sensitivity and mold sickness, or even they just want to prevent those things from happening to them or their children in the future. It's just incredible that people like you exist, because that didn't used to be a thing.
Yes.
Guys, we are going to link all of Christine's resources in the show notes, so feel free to go scroll down and check those out and follow her on Instagram. She posts a ton of great content. Christine, thank you so much for coming on and sharing all of your wisdom with us today. I so appreciate everything that you have spoken on today.
Thank you. It was great.
Yes, this was awesome. We will catch you guys on the next episode of the Organimama podcast.
Hey friend, thanks for listening to today's episode of the Organimama podcast. If you're looking for more ways to dive deeper into low tox living, I want to tell you about my Organi Guides. In 2024, I wrote a series of digital guides that walks you through exactly how to rid your home of toxic possessions and chemicals, from kitchen equipment to bedding to paint to baby toys to your clothes and accessories. You'll learn exactly what materials and ingredients to avoid, what materials and ingredients are safe, and which brands and products I recommend as good, healthy options for your family. Listeners of the Organimama podcast can get 20% off any of my Organi Guides using code PODCAST, and I've linked all the guides in the show notes for you below. As always, do your best and let go of the rest. Bye for now.